The morning sun blazed across Camp Pendleton's advanced marksmanship complex, casting long shadows from the observation towers and creating heat mirages that danced above the firing line. The crack of precision rifles had been echoing across the range since 0600 hours, but now an uncomfortable silence had settled over the 15 members of SEAL Team 6, who stood watching their lead sniper instructor fail for the third consecutive time. Chief Petty Officer Jake Brennan slammed his fist into the dirt beside his shooting mat, sending up a small cloud of dust that caught the morning light. The man they called Hammer for his ability to nail any target under impossible conditions had just missed a 1,200-meter shot that should have been routine for someone of his caliber. His latest round had gone wide by 8 inches, an unforgivable margin in the world of precision shooting, where millimeters meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Wind shift, Jake muttered to himself, though everyone present knew that was an excuse. The red range flags hung limp in the still morning air. There was no wind to blame, only the bitter taste of failure in front of his entire team. The technical details told the real story. The M24 sniper rifle chambered in 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO, firing a 168-grain Sierra Match King bullet at 2,580 feet per second, should have connected. The math didn't lie. At 1,200 meters, with zero wind and perfect visibility, this was a shot Jake had made thousands of times before. The physics were simple, the execution fundamental. But today, something was off. Lieutenant Ethan Graves, Jake's second-in-command, stood with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. At 32, Ethan had seen enough combat in Afghanistan and Iraq to know that everyone had off days. But this was different. This was their annual sniper qualification, the test that separated the elite from the merely excellent, and their best shooter was falling apart. "Maybe we should take a break," suggested Petty Officer Dylan Nash, trying to ease the tension. Dylan was the youngest of the group at 26, but he had already accumulated more confirmed kills than most snipers twice his age. "Come back when the conditions are better." "The conditions are perfect," Jake snapped, pushing himself up from his prone position. His 6'2" frame was coated in dust from lying on the ground for the past hour, and his eyes burned with frustration. "I just need to—" He stopped mid-sentence as movement at the range entrance caught his attention. A slight figure had appeared at the security gate, showed credentials to the guard, and was now walking toward them across the massive complex. As the person drew closer, the SEALs could make out details that seemed almost laughably out of place in this temple of precision violence. She was young, maybe 20 or 21, standing no more than 5'4" in standard-issue boots. Her uniform bore the simple markings of a supply specialist, the kind of support personnel who counted bullets and filed paperwork, while real warriors did the dangerous work. Her name tape read, Lockhart, S., and she carried a clipboard tucked under one arm like a college student heading to class. "You've got to be kidding me," Lieutenant Ethan Graves muttered, watching the young woman's approach with increasing disbelief. "Did someone order coffee?" The comment drew chuckles from several of the SEALs. Petty Officer First Class Garrett Flynn added his own observation, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like someone's lost. Administration building is that way, sweetheart." He pointed toward the main complex, the gesture dismissive. Sarah Lockhart continued walking toward them, her pace steady and unhurried. When she was within speaking distance, she stopped and consulted her clipboard, seemingly oblivious to the 15 pairs of eyes now focused on her with varying degrees of amusement and irritation. "Excuse me," Jake called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed instantly. "This is a restricted area. Active weapons testing in progress. You need to leave immediately." Sarah looked up from her clipboard, her brown eyes meeting Jake's without a trace of the intimidation most people felt when confronted by a fully armed Navy SEAL. "Chief Brennan," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm Specialist Lockhart from Supply. I'm here for the weekly ammunition inventory." "The weekly what?" Ethan stepped forward, his disbelief evident. "You're counting bullets while we're shooting them?" "Standard procedure," Sarah replied, her tone professional and matter-of-fact. "Every Thursday at 700 hours. It's on the range schedule." "I don't care if it's written in stone," Jake said, his frustration from his missed shots now finding a new target. "We're conducting classified training operations here. No support personnel allowed." Sarah tilted her head slightly, a gesture that might have been confusion or might have been something else entirely. "The range schedule shows SEAL Team 6 qualification until 800. It's now 7:15. Technically, you're running over your allotted time." The sheer audacity of the statement left the SEALs momentarily speechless. This child, because that's what she looked like to them, was citing regulations to some of the most elite warriors in the American military. Dylan recovered first, laughing openly. "How old are you, Specialist? 12? Did you get lost on your way to bring someone coffee?" "I'm 21, Sarah said simply, making another note on her clipboard. 21, Garrett repeated, shaking his head. "When I was 21, I was already on my second deployment to Afghanistan. You look like you should be studying for college finals, not wandering around a military base." The group's laughter rolled across the range, each man adding his own comment. They talked about her youth, her small stature, the absurdity of her presence in this place where violence was studied as a science and practiced as an art. Through it all, Sarah continued making notes, her pencil moving steadily across the page. But then something shifted. Her gaze drifted from her paperwork to the M24 sniper rifle lying on Jake's shooting mat, its barrel still warm from the morning's failures. She studied it for a moment, her eyes tracking from the rifle to the distant targets, then to the wind flags, then back to the rifle. There was something in the way she looked at the weapon, a familiarity that didn't match her clipboard and supply specialist designation. "Your 0 is off," she said quietly, almost to herself. The laughter stopped abruptly. Jake's face darkened as he took a step toward her. "What did you just say?" Sarah looked up at him, seemingly unaware of the danger in his tone. "Your rifle. The 0 is off by approximately 3 minutes of angle. High and right. That's why you're missing." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Listen here, Specialist." Jake's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "I've been shooting professionally since before you were born. I've got more trigger time than you have birthdays. Don't presume to tell me about my weapon." "I'm not presuming anything," Sarah replied, her voice remaining calm. "I'm observing. 3 shots, all with the same point of impact error. It's a consistent pattern that suggests mechanical offset rather than shooter error." Ethan moved to stand beside Jake, presenting a united front of skepticism and growing anger. "You watched 3 shots and diagnosed a problem that our lead instructor couldn't identify? That's rich." Master Gunnery Sergeant Rachel Sterling had been observing from the range control tower, and she chose this moment to intervene. The 45-year-old Marine descended the metal stairs with measured steps, her expression unreadable behind military-issue sunglasses. Rachel had been running this range for 8 years, and she'd seen every kind of ego conflict imaginable. But something about this situation made her particularly interested. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "This supply clerk thinks she knows more about shooting than we do," Dylan said, gesturing dismissively toward Sarah. "She's disrupting our training." Rachel looked at Sarah for a long moment, something flickering in her eyes that the SEALs couldn't quite identify. There was recognition there, or perhaps memory. "Specialist Lockhart, are you qualified on the M24? Rachel asked. "I have some familiarity with the platform, Master Gunnery Sergeant," Sarah replied carefully. "Some familiarity?" Jake scoffed. "That's like saying you have some familiarity with brain surgery because you watched a medical show." "Chief Brennan," Rachel said, her tone carrying a subtle warning. If Specialist Lockhart believes she's identified an issue with your zero, perhaps we should verify it. After all, you have been struggling this morning. The reminder of his failure stung, and Jake's pride pushed him to make a decision he would soon regret. Fine, he said, the word coming out harsh and clipped. You want to prove something, Specialist? Show us. Take the rifle and show us this mechanical offset you're so sure about. I'm just here for the inventory, Sarah said, but something in her voice had changed. There was a tension there now, like a string being drawn tight. No, 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 Ethan interjected, sensing blood in the water. You can't walk onto our range, tell us we're doing it wrong, and then hide behind your clipboard. Either prove your theory or admit you don't know what you're talking about. The other SEALs had formed a semicircle now, their body language aggressive and challenging. These were men who had faced death in countless forms, who had operated in the most dangerous places on Earth, and they weren't about to be lectured by someone who looked like she should be serving them coffee at Starbucks. Garrett stepped forward, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. Look, Specialist, I get it. You probably saw some YouTube videos about long-range shooting, maybe played some video games. But this is real life. That rifle weighs 15 pounds. The recoil would probably knock you on your... I'll do it, Sarah said, suddenly cutting him off. She set down her clipboard with deliberate care, the action somehow carrying more weight than it should have. The SEALs exchanged glances of barely suppressed amusement. This was going to be entertaining. Watching this tiny woman try to handle a precision rifle would give them something to laugh about for months. Sarah walked over to the equipment table where extra gear was arranged. She examined the shooting gloves for a moment before setting them aside. I won't need these, she said quietly. Of course not, Dylan muttered sarcastically. Wouldn't want to break a nail. Sarah moved to the rifle with a fluidity that made Rachel lean forward slightly. The young woman's hands moved over the weapon in a pattern that was both familiar and strange, checking the action, verifying the chamber was clear, examining the scope mounts with careful attention to detail. It wasn't just competent, it was practiced to the point of being unconscious. She verified the torque on the loopholed Ultra M3A scope rings with her fingers, a subtle test that most shooters wouldn't even think to perform. She checked the parallax adjustment, ensuring it was set for 1,000 yards. Her hands moved to the bolt assembly, feeling the smooth, two-lug action with its 60-degree bolt throw. Every movement was precise, economical, professional. You want to adjust the zero? Jake asked, his tone suggesting he expected her to take any excuse to avoid actually shooting. No, Sarah said simply. Your zero is fine for your position and technique. I'll compensate. The absurdity of the statement drew open laughter from several SEALs. In precision shooting, everything was about consistency and mechanical perfection. What she was suggesting, manually compensating for a mechanical offset, required a level of skill that took years to develop. Sarah lowered herself into position behind the rifle, and that's when everything changed. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. The awkward supply clerk who had walked onto the range disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. Sarah's body molded itself to the rifle like water finding its level. Every angle perfect, every point of contact exactly where it needed to be. Her left elbow positioned itself directly under the rifle's receiver, creating a bone-supported platform that would remain stable under recoil. Her right hand found the pistol grip with firm, but not strangling pressure. The stock settled into the pocket of her shoulder with practiced ease. Her cheek found its weld on the stock, the same pressure point she'd found thousands of times before. Her breathing changed, becoming deep and rhythmic, then gradually slowing until it was barely perceptible. Rachel pulled out her phone and began recording, her instincts telling her she was about to witness something extraordinary. Sometime today would be nice, Ethan said, but his mockery had lost some of its edge. Something about the way Sarah held herself, the absolute stillness she achieved, was setting off alarm bells in the primitive parts of their brains that recognized a predator. Sarah's breathing had transitioned into something the SEALs had never seen before. Her chest rose deeply, oxygenating her blood, preparing her body for what came next. Then the breathing slowed, but it didn't stop entirely the way an amateur would hold their breath. Instead, she achieved what looked like a partial respiratory pause. Her diaphragm stabilized, her core absolutely motionless, while minimal air exchange continued through her upper chest. It was a technique that took years to master, a way of maintaining the stillness required for precision shooting, while avoiding the position degradation that came from truly holding one's breath. 10 seconds passed in absolute stillness. Sarah's finger found the trigger, resting against it with the lightest possible touch. Her breathing stopped entirely. For 3 heartbeats, she was a statue, merged with the rifle into a single instrument of precision. Then the rifle fired. The sound was sharp and clean, and 1,200 meters downrange, the steel target rang with a clear, bell-like tone. Dead center. "Lucky shot," Dylan said immediately, but his voice carried uncertainty now. Sarah worked the bolt without lifting her cheek from the stock, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round in one smooth motion. The brass casing arced through the air, glinting in the sunlight before landing in the dust. She made a tiny adjustment to her position, so small the observers almost missed it, a slight shift of her hips, a fractional change in the angle of her support elbow. The second shot rang out. 1,400 meters this time. Another perfect hit. The joking had stopped entirely. Several SEALs leaned forward, their trained eyes recognizing something they hadn't expected to see. This wasn't beginner's luck or YouTube tutorials. This was expertise, the kind that came from countless hours of practice and an almost supernatural understanding of the weapon system. "The one on the left," Sarah said quietly, indicating a target at 1,500 meters that Jake had missed 3 times earlier that morning. "That's your trouble target." Without waiting for confirmation, she settled deeper into her position. This time, she held her breath even longer, waiting for something only she could perceive, perhaps a lull in her heartbeat, perhaps a moment of perfect stillness in the air around her. When she fired, the sound seemed different somehow, as if the bullet itself knew where it needed to go. The distant ring of impact came a full 1.5 seconds later. Another perfect hit. But Sarah wasn't finished. Still in position, she worked the bolt and engaged a series of targets at varying distances. 8 shots in total, each one finding its mark with mechanical precision. Targets at 800 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters, 1,400 meters, 1,600 meters. She moved between them with fluid efficiency, her bolt manipulation so smooth it looked choreographed. It was like watching a machine operate, except machines didn't have the subtle artistry she displayed, the tiny adjustments that accounted for variables no computer could calculate. She was compensating for Jake's zero offset mentally, adding 3 minutes of angle to the right and 1.5 minutes down for every shot, making corrections that should have been impossible without actually adjusting the scope. When she finally sat back from the rifle, the range was silent except for the echo of the last impact still ringing in the distance. Sarah stood, brushed dust from her uniform with the same careful efficiency she'd shown with everything else, and walked back to her clipboard as if nothing had happened. "Who are you?" Jake's voice had lost all of its earlier arrogance, replaced by something approaching awe. Sarah picked up her clipboard and resumed her inventory, her pencil moving across the page. "Specialist Sarah Lockhart, supply clerk, 2nd Battalion Support Company." "No," Garrett said, shaking his head violently. "Supply clerks don't shoot like that. I've seen Olympic champions who can't shoot like that. Who are you really?" It was Rachel who broke the building tension, walking over with her phone still in hand. "I think I know," she said quietly. While Sarah had been shooting, Rachel had pulled up the Advanced Marksman database, running a search on the name that had been nagging at her memory. "I ran her name through the Advanced Marksman database while she was shooting," Rachel said, showing the screen to Jake. Jake looked at the screen, his eyes widening with each line he read. "That's impossible." What? Ethan demanded, moving closer. What's impossible? Rachel turned the phone so everyone could see. The database entry showed Sarah's name, followed by achievements that seemed to belong in fiction rather than reality. Junior Distinguished Marksman at age 12. Unofficial range record at Pendleton at age 14, 1,847 meters, a cold bore shot that had never been officially recognized because she'd been too young to compete. 1,847 confirmed training eliminations before age 15. Training eliminations? Dylan asked, confused by the terminology. It's how we track precision shooting in advanced tactical scenarios, Rachel explained, her voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. Moving targets, varying distances, stress conditions. Most scout snipers accumulate maybe 300 in their entire training career. She paused, letting the implication sink in. She had 1,800 before she could drive. Garrett's voice cracked slightly. But how? Colonel David Kincaid chose that moment to arrive at the range. The silver-haired Marine colonel had been watching from the administration building, alerted by the unusual activity. At 55, Kincaid had seen enough combat to fill several lifetimes, and he had an eye for talent that had never failed him. "Stand at ease, gentlemen," he said as the SEALs snapped to attention, their training overriding their shock. His eyes found Sarah, and something shifted in his weathered face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. He walked closer, studying her features with an intensity that made even the SEALs uncomfortable. "Lockhart," he said slowly, tasting the name. "Sarah Lockhart. You're Marcus's daughter." The words hit the assembled warriors like a physical blow. Marcus Reaper Lockhart was more than a legend. He was a myth that had taken human form. The Marine Scout sniper had confirmed kills that were still classified, shots that physics said were impossible, operations that had changed the course of conflicts no one would ever read about in history books. "Reaper has a daughter?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah remained silent, but her posture had changed subtly. The careful anonymity she'd maintained was cracking under the colonel's recognition. "Your father trained you," Kincaid said. "It wasn't a question. Started when you were 7, if I remember correctly. He used to bring you to the unofficial ranges, the ones we don't talk about. Taught you things that weren't in any manual." The SEALs stood frozen, processing this information. They had mocked and belittled the daughter of one of the most lethal men who had ever lived. A woman who had been trained from childhood by a master of the craft they thought they had perfected. Ethan found his voice first. "Why didn't you say anything? Why let us make fools of ourselves?" Sarah looked at him with those calm brown eyes. "Would you have believed me if I had? Or would you have thought I was just another person trying to claim connection to a legend?" "But with skills like yours," Garrett protested, "you could be operational. You could be doing what your father did. Why are you counting bullets in supply?" Sarah's expression shifted, something dark crossing her face. "My father is dead," she said quietly, and the words carried a weight that silenced any response. "Or missing. The official report changes depending on who you ask and how much clearance they have." Kincaid's expression tightened. "Your father was investigating something before he disappeared. Equipment shipments that were going missing, gear that was ending up in the wrong hands." Sarah nodded slowly. "Precision optics, range-finding equipment, thermal scopes, the kind of gear that could turn an average shooter into a long-range threat. He tracked the shipments for 6 months in 2021, built a case that implicated people very high up the chain of command. And then," Jake prompted, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Then he was ordered to stop," Sarah said, her voice flat and controlled. 3 weeks later, he was deployed on a classified operation to Syria. His team was ambushed. 7 Marines died. My father's body was never recovered." She paused, and when she continued, there was steel in her voice. "And the investigation into the missing equipment was permanently closed." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Reaper hadn't just disappeared, he'd been silenced, possibly killed for discovering something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. "You're here to finish what he started," Rachel said, understanding dawning on her face. "That's why you're in supply. You're tracking the same shipments he was." Sarah didn't confirm or deny, but her silence spoke volumes. Dylan stepped forward, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. "The shooting techniques you used, I've never seen anything like them. The way you held your breath for that long without position degradation, that's not standard training." "Ghost breathing," Sarah said quietly. "My father developed it for extreme long-range shots. You oxygenate before taking position, then maintain a partial respiratory pause that keeps your core stable while allowing minimal air exchange. It takes years to master without degrading your shooting position." "Could you teach it?" Ethan asked, his pride completely forgotten in the face of such obvious expertise. "My father always said techniques should be earned, not given," Sarah replied. "But given what's at stake—" She trailed off as Kincaid's radio crackled to life. He listened for a moment, his expression growing serious. "Copy that. We're on our way." He looked at the assembled group. "We have a situation. Someone just attempted to breach the secure weapons storage at the North Depot. They were after precision optics and range-finding equipment." Sarah's reaction was immediate and telling. "Check the serial numbers against the inventory from 3 weeks ago. I guarantee you'll find discrepancies." "How could you possibly know that?" Kincaid asked. "Because that's the pattern my father identified," Sarah explained, her voice taking on the analytical tone of someone who had studied this for years. "Equipment is reported as present during inspections, then goes missing shortly after. But the paperwork is altered to show it was never there to begin with. Someone inside is facilitating the thefts, someone with high-level access to both the inventory systems and the inspection schedules." Jake and his team exchanged glances. They had gone from mocking this young woman to realizing she might be the key to uncovering a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. "We need to move," Kincaid said. "Lockhart, you're with me. Gentlemen," he addressed the SEALs, "what you've heard here is classified at the highest level. Not a word to anyone." As they prepared to leave, Jake approached Sarah. His entire demeanor had changed from the arrogant instructor who had dismissed her at first sight. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been understanding. "You reacted based on the information available. That's what warriors do. The difference is whether you can adjust when new information arrives." "Your father really taught you everything, didn't he?" A sad smile crossed Sarah's face. "Everything except how to live in a world where he doesn't exist. I'm still working on that part." The convoy of vehicles moved swiftly toward the North Depot, carrying warriors who had just learned a fundamental lesson about assumptions and appearances. In the lead vehicle, Sarah sat quietly, her fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of something beneath her uniform shirt. A set of dog tags that weren't her own, but those of a ghost who might not be as dead as everyone believed. The investigation at the depot revealed exactly what Sarah had predicted. Serial numbers had been altered, paperwork had been falsified, and several items of equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were missing. But more importantly, they found something else. A shipping manifest with an address that Sarah recognized immediately. "That's one of the locations my father was investigating," she said, studying the document with the intensity of someone who had memorized every detail of her father's work. He believed it was a transfer point for stolen equipment being sold to foreign operatives. Kincaid made a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "Chief Brennan, I want you and your team to provide security for Specialist Lockhart while she continues this investigation. Someone killed 7 Marines to keep this secret, and they won't hesitate to kill again." Jake nodded immediately. "Understood, sir. We'll keep her safe." "I don't need protection," Sarah said quietly, but there was no arrogance in her voice, only statement of fact. "What I need is access to the shipping records from the past year and I need to cross-reference them with deployment schedules and personnel assignments. You'll get both, Kincaid assured her. Your father was a hero who died trying to protect this country from enemies within. We're going to finish what he started. As they worked through the afternoon, patterns began to emerge. Equipment would disappear just before certain units deployed, creating shortages that forced them to operate with inferior gear. The missing items would then appear in conflict zones, in the hands of insurgents who suddenly had the capability to engage American forces at distances that should have been safe. Garrett, who had initially been one of Sarah's most vocal critics, now worked beside her. This AN/PAS-13 thermal scope, he said, pointing to an inventory entry. 23 missing in 6 months, all from different bases, but during the same inspection windows. Someone's coordinating this from inside, Ethan concluded. Someone with access across multiple installations. Sarah pulled out a photograph from her folder, one she'd been carrying since her father disappeared. It showed Reaper with several other Marines at a forward operating base, all of them smiling despite the harsh conditions. The photo was dated May 2021, just 2 weeks before the ambush. My father took this 2 weeks before he died, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Look at the background. The SEALs leaned in, studying the image carefully. In the background, barely visible, was a stack of equipment cases with serial numbers visible on their sides. Those serial numbers, Dylan said, his voice tight with recognition. They match the stolen equipment list, which means the equipment was already in Syria before my father's team was deployed, Sarah concluded, the words falling like hammer blows. Someone knew they were coming and made sure the insurgents had the tools to ambush them. This wasn't just theft. This was murder. The weight of this revelation settled over the group like a shroud. This wasn't just about missing equipment or even a cover-up. This was treason that had cost American lives, that had killed men who had trusted their government to protect them. Jake's phone rang, breaking the tense silence. He listened for a moment, his expression growing darker with each passing second. Understood. We're on our way. He looked at the others, his jaw set. That was base security. Someone just accessed Specialist Lockhart's personnel file remotely from outside the base network. They know who she is, and they know what she's doing. Sarah stood, her calm demeanor unchanged despite the implied threat. Good, she said, and there was something cold in her voice that reminded them all of whose daughter she was. Let them come. My father died without getting justice. I won't make the same mistake. As evening approached, the team established a defensive position at the visiting officer quarters. The SEALs who had started the day thinking they were the apex predators in any room now found themselves protecting someone who might be even more dangerous than they were. Ethan took first watch while the others reviewed the evidence. You know, he said to Sarah, when you walked onto that range this morning, I thought you were just some kid playing soldier. And now? Sarah asked, not looking up from the documents she was studying. Now I think you might be the most dangerous person on this base, Ethan said honestly. Your father's skills combined with years of preparation and a personal vendetta, that's a combination that scares even me. Sarah finally looked at him, and for the first time he saw the pain behind her controlled exterior. I'm not dangerous because of what my father taught me, she said quietly. I'm dangerous because I have nothing left to lose. They took the only family I had. The least I can do is make sure they pay for it. The night passed quietly, but everyone remained on edge, knowing that somewhere out there, people who had killed to protect their secrets now knew that Marcus Reaper Lockhart's daughter was coming for them. And unlike her father, she had no intention of working in the shadows. The night had been long, filled with the tension of waiting for an attack that never came. As dawn broke over Camp Pendleton, Sarah sat with her back against the wall of the visiting officer quarters, her eyes scanning the perimeter with the same methodical precision she'd shown on the range. She hadn't slept, but she didn't look tired. If anything, she looked focused, like a blade being sharpened for a specific purpose. Jake approached with 2 cups of coffee, offering one to her. You should rest, he said. We've got this covered. Sarah accepted the coffee but shook her head. My father used to say that rest is a luxury you earn after the mission is complete. Right now, we're still in the middle of it. Before Jake could respond, Sarah's secure phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, her expression changing as she read the screen. The number displayed was one she hadn't seen in 5 years, one she thought she'd never see again. "What is it?" Jake asked, noticing the shift in her demeanor. Sarah showed him the message. It was simple, direct, and impossible. Junior 6, this is Viper Actual. Your father's last mission isn't over. Building 709, 2200 hours tonight. Come alone. Trust no one in uniform. V. Jake read it twice, his tactical mind already analyzing the implications. Viper Actual was your father's spotter, wasn't he? Staff Sergeant William Harding, Sarah confirmed, her voice tight. He was listed as killed in action in the same ambush that took my father. If this is really him, if he survived, then he's been underground for 5 years, Jake finished. The question is, why? Ethan and the others had gathered around, drawn by the tension in the conversation. Dylan looked at the message and frowned. It's obviously a trap. They know you'll come if they dangle the possibility of answers about your father. Maybe, Sarah said, but her eyes were distant, calculating. Or maybe William really did survive. Maybe he's been doing exactly what I've been doing, tracking the conspiracy from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to surface. Either way, you're not going alone, Jake said firmly. We provide overwatch, maintain a perimeter. If it's legitimate, we verify and extract. If it's a trap, we get you out. Sarah started to protest, but Colonel Kincaid's voice cut through the discussion. He'd arrived with the morning shift change, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night spent reviewing the evidence they'd gathered. The specialist goes, Kincaid said, his tone brooking no argument. But Chief Brennan is right. You go with support. SEAL team provides overwatch from 400 meters. We equip you with comm gear and body armor under civilian clothes. If this is William Harding and he has intelligence, we need it. If it's a trap, we need to know who's setting it and why. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the tactical wisdom, even as part of her wanted to rush to Building 709 immediately, to confirm whether the ghost of her father's partner was real or just another cruel manipulation. The hours until 2200 passed with agonizing slowness. The team used the time to plan, to prepare, to gather intelligence on Building 709. It was an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the base, the kind of structure that had been forgotten by everyone, except the people who needed a place where conversations could happen without witnesses. As evening fell, Sarah prepared herself with the same methodical care she'd shown with the rifle. She checked her Sig Sauer P226, the 9mm sidearm that had been her father's preferred backup weapon. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. She verified the communication earpiece, testing the connection with Jake's team. She adjusted the body armor beneath her civilian jacket, feeling its weight settle against her ribs. Jake approached as she was finishing her preparations. Your father trained you for this, he said. Not just the shooting, but all of it. The tactical thinking, the survival skills, the ability to read a situation and adapt. He trained me for war, Sarah replied quietly. He just never told me the war would be against our own people. That makes it harder, Jake acknowledged, but also more important. If Americans are selling out other Americans, if people in uniform are getting Marines killed for profit, then someone needs to stop them. And that someone is me, Sarah said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. The approach to Building 709 was made on foot, through the darkened areas of the base where security lights had been conveniently malfunctioning for the past week. Sarah moved like a shadow, her training evident in every step. Behind her, invisible in the darkness, Jake's team spread out in a protective arc, their night vision equipment turning the world into shades of green. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure of corrugated metal and concrete that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Sarah paused at the entrance, her hand resting on her sidearm, every sense alert for danger. "I'm going in," she whispered into her comm. "Copy," Jake's voice crackled back. "We have eyes on all exits. You're clear to proceed." Sarah pushed through the door into darkness that seemed absolute after the dim starlight outside. She waited, letting her eyes adjust, her breathing controlled and steady. Somewhere in the blackness ahead, she heard the subtle sound of movement. "Junior 6, a voice called from the shadows, using the call sign her father had given her when she was 7 years old. "Don't move. Let me verify you're alone." Sarah stood still, her hand still near her weapon but not on it. She recognized the voice, older and rougher than she remembered, but unmistakably belonging to William Harding. A flashlight clicked on, its beam pointed at the floor to avoid blinding her. In its indirect glow, Sarah could make out a figure stepping from behind a stack of pallets. The man was shorter than she remembered, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, old wounds that had never properly healed evident in the way he moved. "William," Sarah breathed, and despite everything she'd been through, despite all the control she'd maintained, there was emotion in her voice. "You've grown," William said, a ghost of a smile crossing his weathered face. "Last time I saw you, you were 16. Your father had just shown me the evidence he'd compiled. He knew they were going to kill him for it." "Then why didn't he run?" Sarah asked, the question she'd been carrying for 5 years finally finding voice. "Why didn't he disappear, go underground like you did?" "Because running would have meant letting them win," William replied. "Your father believed that some fights you don't walk away from, no matter the cost. He sent me away the night before the deployment, told me to survive, to document everything, to wait for the moment when the truth could actually matter." He pulled out a tablet from a weatherproof case, its screen casting blue light across his scarred features. "I've been tracking them for 5 years, Sarah. General Richard Morrison at the Pentagon, coordinating the thefts. Colonel James Harper, who's supposed to be dead but is actually running Morrison's private army. Defense contractors, foreign buyers, a whole network of people profiting from American blood." Sarah took the tablet, her eyes scanning the documents that appeared on screen. Bank transfers, shipping manifests, photographs of meetings that should never have happened. It was everything her father had been looking for, and more. "Morrison's been selling equipment to foreign operatives for 3 years, William continued, using the money to fund black operations that Congress never approved. Operations that served someone else's agenda, someone higher up the chain. Your father found proof that linked Morrison directly to the ambush in Syria. Morrison made sure Marcus disappeared to keep him quiet." "Disappeared," Sarah repeated, latching onto the word. "Not killed. You said disappeared." William's expression grew complicated, pain and hope mixing in equal measure. "They took him alive, Sarah. That much I saw before they pushed me into that drainage ditch. The RPG that was supposed to kill me only wounded me, and I played dead while they collected the bodies. I saw them put your father in a vehicle, saw them drive away. Where they took him, whether he's still alive after 5 years, I don't know, but I never saw him die." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For 5 years, she'd operated on the assumption that her father was dead, that she was avenging his death rather than searching for his life. The possibility that he might still be breathing, still waiting for rescue somewhere, changed everything. "There's more," William said, pulling out a phone that looked like it had survived a war. "Your father sent me this the night before the ambush. He knew something was wrong, could feel it in his gut. This contains every piece of evidence he gathered, encrypted with a code only you would know." Sarah took the phone with trembling hands. The screen showed a single prompt, white text on black background. "Junior's first target distance." Her fingers moved automatically, muscle memory from a lifetime ago. 0, 3, 5, 0, 350 meters, the distance of her first successful shot when she was 7 years old. Her father had been lying beside her in the prone position that day, his voice calm and encouraging, teaching her to breathe, to wait, to become one with the rifle. The phone unlocked, revealing hundreds of files organized with military precision. Shipping manifests cross-referenced with casualty reports. Bank records showing the flow of money from Pentagon accounts to offshore holdings. Communication intercepts that prove coordination between Morrison and foreign operatives. Photos that captured moments meant to stay hidden forever. "This is enough to bury Morrison," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she scrolled through the evidence. "It's enough to get you killed," William corrected sharply. "Morrison has assets everywhere, Sarah. The moment he knows you have this, you'll have a target on your back bigger than anything your father ever aimed at. These people don't just cover their tracks, they erase anyone who might expose them." A sudden movement outside caught Sarah's peripheral vision through a grimy window. She recognized Jake's hand signals immediately, the urgent gestures that meant multiple contacts approaching fast. "We've got company," she said, her tactical mind instantly shifting gears. William saw it too, his body tensing despite his injuries. "They found us. Morrison must have been monitoring my communications, waiting for me to surface." Sarah's calm crackled to life. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north." Jake's voice was tight with controlled urgency. 6 vehicles, approximately 24 personnel. They're not wearing standard military insignia, unknown hostiles, and they're coming fast. Sarah made a tactical decision that would have made her father proud. "William, give me everything you have. All of it. The tablet, the phone, any physical evidence. Then get to the drainage tunnel on the east side. Chief Brennan will cover your extraction." "What about you?" William demanded. "I'm going to do what my father would have done," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the cold certainty of someone who had already accepted the cost. "I'm going to become the distraction they can't ignore." Before William could protest, Sarah was already moving. She climbed the metal stairs to the second floor of the warehouse, her boots making minimal noise on the rusted steps. She found a position that gave her overlook of the approaching vehicles, a broken window that provided concealment while allowing a clear field of fire. Through the window, she watched the convoy approach. 6 vehicles, all black SUVs with tinted windows, moving with military precision. These weren't random mercenaries or opportunistic criminals. They were professionals, former special operations soldiers who now work for whoever paid the most. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a man stepped out who made Sarah's blood run cold. She recognized him from the photographs in her father's files, from the classified documents that weren't supposed to exist. Colonel James Harper, the man who had supposedly died in Iraq in 2019. The man who had actually gone underground to run Morrison's private army, to coordinate the thefts and murders that kept the money flowing. He was tall, lean, moving with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He raised a bullhorn to his lips, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Specialist Lockhart," Harper called out, his tone almost conversational. "We know you're in there. We know William Harding is with you. You have something that belongs to us. Come out peacefully and we can discuss this like civilized people." Sarah keyed her radio to the frequency she knew the SEALs were monitoring. "Chief Brennan, the man speaking is Colonel James Harper. He's supposed to be dead. Whatever happens next, make sure that information gets to Colonel Kincaid. The conspiracy goes deeper than we thought." "Copy that," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the tension. "We have clear shots on multiple targets. Your call on rules of engagement." Sarah thought about what her father would do, what Marcus Reaper Lockhart would have done when faced with overwhelming odds and no good options. The answer came to her with crystal clarity. He would have found a way to turn their strength against them, to use their confidence as a weapon. She picked up a piece of broken concrete and threw it through another window on the opposite side of the building. The crash drew attention exactly as she'd intended, heads turning toward the wrong location. While they were distracted, Sarah moved to her actual firing position, settling behind a sturdy support beam with the M24 rifle she'd brought from the range. The weapon felt like an old friend in her hands, every curve and edge familiar from countless hours of practice. Through the scope, she found Harper. The man was standing in the open, arrogant, as if he believed himself invulnerable. Sarah remembered her father's words, spoken during one of their many training sessions. The most dangerous enemy is the one who believes himself invincible. They always make mistakes. "Colonel Harper," Sarah called out, her voice carrying clearly across the distance, amplified by the acoustic properties of the warehouse. "You killed 7 Marines in Syria. You tried to kill my father. I'm going to give you one chance to surrender." Harper's laughter echoed off the warehouse walls, cruel and dismissive. "Little girl, you have no idea what you're involved in. Your father thought he could fight the system too. Look where it got him." "It got him the truth," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "And now I have it. Every document, every transaction, every crime you and Morrison committed. It's already being uploaded to servers you can't reach, distributed to people who will make sure it sees daylight." That was a lie, but Harper didn't know that. Sarah saw him tense through her scope, saw his hand reach for the radio on his tactical vest. She had seconds before he ordered his men to storm the building. The first shot from her rifle took the radio out of Harper's hand before his fingers could press the transmit button. The device spun through the air, destroyed, landing 15 feet away in a shower of plastic and electronics. The second shot hit the engine block of the lead vehicle. Steam erupted from under the hood as coolant lines ruptured, the vehicle instantly disabled. The third, fourth, and fifth shots came in rapid succession, each one finding a tire on a different vehicle. Driver's side front tires, all of them placed with surgical precision. 12 seconds of rapid bolt manipulation, and Harper's entire convoy was immobilized. "Next one goes through something more important than rubber," Sarah announced, working the bolt to chamber another round. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Harper's men opened fire on the warehouse, hundreds of rounds tearing through the old structure. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of automatic weapons fire that filled the air with the smell of cordite and the whine of ricochets. Sarah rolled away from her position as bullets whined past, showering her with fragments of concrete and wood. She moved to a new location, already planning her next shots, already 3 steps ahead in the tactical chess game. But Jake and his team were ready. From their concealed positions 400 meters out, the SEALs returned fire with disciplined precision. Unlike Harper's men who were spraying bullets indiscriminately, each SEAL shot was calculated, measured, designed to have maximum effect. The battlefield that had been weighted entirely in Harper's favor suddenly became a killing ground where his men were exposed and taking casualties. "William, go now!" Sarah shouted into her radio as she moved to another firing position. Through a hole in the warehouse wall, she saw the older man sprinting toward the drainage tunnel, his damaged arm clutched against his chest. Jake's team provided covering fire, their shots forcing Harper's men to seek cover rather than pursue. Harper's voice came over a loudspeaker again, but now it carried rage rather than arrogance. "You just signed your death warrant, Lockhart. You and everyone helping you." Sarah found a new shooting position and acquired targets through her scope. These men had killed Marines. They had sold out their country for money. They had destroyed families like hers, leaving children without fathers and wives without husbands. Her father had taught her that killing was sometimes necessary, but should never be enjoyed. Today she found that lesson very difficult to follow, but she adhered to it anyway. Her shots were methodical, precise, but not lethal. Weapons disabled, shot out of hands. Vehicles immobilized, engines destroyed. Communication equipment shattered, leaving Harper's force deaf and fragmented. She wasn't trying to kill them. She was systematically removing their ability to fight, turning them from predators into prey, just as her father had taught her. Ethan's voice came over the radio, urgent. "Sarah, we've got more vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like military police. Someone called in the firefight. Perfect timing, Sarah thought grimly. Harper and his men were about to be caught in a very compromising position, engaged in a firefight on a military base with no official authorization, no legitimate reason for their presence. "Colonel Harper," Sarah called out one final time, "the military police are 3 minutes out. You can surrender to me, or you can explain to them why you're conducting an unsanctioned military operation on American soil with a private army. Your choice." Through her scope, she saw Harper's face, saw the moment he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. His tactical advantage had evaporated. His force was immobilized. And now official authorities were arriving who would ask questions he couldn't answer. He gestured sharply to his remaining men, and they began falling back to their vehicles, dragging their wounded with them. They were professionals enough to know when a mission had failed, when extraction was the only viable option. But Sarah wasn't quite done. As Harper retreated to his vehicle, she put one final shot through the rear window, close enough to his head that he felt the wind of its passage, close enough that he would know in his bones how easily she could have killed him. The message was clear. "I could have taken you. I chose not to. Remember that." The vehicles roared away, limping on damaged tires, trailing smoke from destroyed engines, just as the military police arrived with lights flashing and sirens wailing. Sarah carefully set down her rifle and walked out of the warehouse with her hands visible, but not raised. She had nothing to surrender for. She had defended herself against an illegal attack, had protected evidence of a conspiracy, had done exactly what any warrior would do when faced with enemies of the state. Colonel Kincaid arrived with the military police, having been monitoring the situation from the base command center. He looked at the bullet-riddled warehouse, the brass casings scattered across the ground, the blood trails where wounded men had been dragged away. "Specialist Lockhart," he said formally, though his eyes held something like pride. "Report." Sarah's voice was professional, controlled, showing none of the adrenaline that was surely coursing through her system. "Sir, we were ambushed by unknown hostiles attempting to steal classified intelligence related to my father's investigation. Staff Sergeant William Harding, previously listed as killed in action, provided crucial evidence of a conspiracy involving General Richard Morrison and Colonel James Harper, who was very much alive despite official records indicating he died in Iraq in 2019. Kincaid processed this information with the calm of a career military officer who had seen enough to no longer be surprised by anything. "Where is this evidence now?" Sarah pulled out the phone William had given her, the device that contained everything her father had died trying to expose. "Right here, sir. Everything my father discovered. Everything William has documented over 5 years of being underground." "Your father allegedly died," Kincaid corrected quietly. "William said they took him alive. Until we have a body, Marcus Reaper Lockhart is just missing, not dead." The word sent a spark of hope through Sarah's chest, a dangerous feeling that she tried not to let grow. Hope was more treacherous than any enemy sniper. Hope made you vulnerable in ways that fear never could, but she couldn't quite extinguish it. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of debriefings, evidence analysis, and secure communications that traveled up the chain of command through channels that Morrison couldn't intercept or influence. The conspiracy that Marcus Reaper Lockhart had uncovered was even larger than Sarah had imagined, sprawling across multiple agencies and reaching into the highest levels of government. $47 million in stolen equipment over 3 years. Dozens of operations compromised. 89 American lives lost to enemies using American weapons and technology. The numbers were staggering, each one representing not just a statistic, but a family destroyed, a future stolen, a promise broken. Morrison had been arrested at the Canadian border, caught trying to flee with a diplomatic passport and $3 million in bearer bonds. His capture had been quiet, efficient, designed to avoid alerting the rest of his network. But word had a way of traveling, And by the time Sarah returned to the range where everything had started, she knew that other arrests were happening across the country. Pentagon officials, State Department bureaucrats, defense contractors who had grown rich on American blood. The range looked different now in the afternoon light, peaceful in a way it hadn't been that first morning. The SEALs were there waiting for her, no longer the arrogant elite who had mocked a supply clerk, but brothers in arms who had fought beside her and seen what she was capable of. Jake approached with something in his hand, a challenge coin that caught the sunlight as he held it out. The kind of coin that special operations units gave to those they considered equals, those who had earned a place in the Brotherhood through action rather than words. "This belongs to you," Jake said simply. "You've more than earned it." Sarah took the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. On one side was the SEAL Team 6 insignia, the trident and anchor that represented some of the most elite warriors in the world. On the other side, freshly engraved, were words that made her throat tight. "Reaper's daughter," and the date. "We were wrong about you," Ethan added, stepping forward. His voice carried genuine respect, the kind that couldn't be faked or forced. "Wrong about what makes a warrior. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished." "He would be proud of all of us," Sarah replied quietly. "We did this together. I couldn't have exposed Morrison without your support." Dylan, who had been among her harshest critics that first morning, now looked at her with something approaching awe. That shooting during the warehouse battle, taking out Harper's equipment without killing anyone, that took more skill than any of us have. "Would you teach us the techniques your father showed you?" Sarah considered the request carefully. These men had proven themselves when it mattered. They had stood with her against overwhelming odds, had trusted her tactical judgment, had followed her lead even though she was younger and less experienced in combat operations. They had earned the right to learn what her father had taught her. "Ghost breathing first," she said finally. "It's the foundation everything else builds on. 0600 tomorrow, right here on this range. But understand something. My father didn't give away techniques. You earn them through sweat and repetition and failure. You earn them by showing up every morning until your body understands what your mind is trying to teach it." Garrett nodded eagerly. "We'll be here, all of us." As they talked, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting another update from the investigation, or perhaps a message from Colonel Kincaid. Instead, she found a single line of text that made her heart stop, made the world around her fade into background noise. The message was encrypted, routed through servers designed to hide its origin. But the signature at the end was unmistakable. "Junior 6, the Reaper still walks. Syria coordinates attached. Come alone. Trust no one in uniform. V." Sarah stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times to make sure she understood. Attached were GPS coordinates for a location deep in hostile Syrian territory, in the same region where her father had supposedly died 5 years ago. "What is it?" Jake asked, noticing the change in her expression. Sarah showed him the message without speaking. Jake read it, his tactical mind immediately analyzing implications and possibilities. "William confirmed they took your father alive," Jake said quietly. "If this is real, if Marcus is still breathing after 5 years, then he's been waiting," Sarah finished, "surviving, enduring, hoping someone would come." Ethan looked at the coordinates, his expression grave. "That's deep in territory controlled by the same warlords Morrison was selling to. If your father's there, he's either a prisoner or he's been working the longest undercover operation in Marine Corps history," Sarah interrupted. "My father wasn't the kind of man who breaks. If they kept him alive, there's a reason. And if he's still there after 5 years, he's been planning, gathering intelligence, waiting for the right moment." "It could also be a trap," Dylan pointed out, his voice carrying the caution of someone who had seen too many good intentions lead to ambushes. "Morrison's in custody, but Harper's still out there. They know you'll come if they dangle the possibility of your father being alive." "I know," Sarah said simply, "but I'm going anyway." Jake studied her for a long moment. seeing the determination in her eyes, the steel in her spine that came from being Marcus Reaper Lockhart's daughter. "What would you do if you were me?" he asked finally. "I'd go," Sarah replied without hesitation, "but not alone. Morrison's network is exposed but not destroyed. Harper's still operational. And whoever's behind this, whoever the architect is that Morrison answered to, they won't stop just because we cut off one head of the Hydra." "Then we go together," Jake said firmly, and one by one the other SEALs nodded their agreement. "You've proven yourself, Sarah. You're one of us now, and we don't leave family behind." Colonel Kincaid, who had been listening from nearby, stepped into their circle. His weathered face showed the strain of the past few days, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Officially, I cannot authorize a rescue mission into Syrian territory based on an unverified text message," Kincaid said, his voice carrying the weight of military protocol. "Unofficially, SEAL Team 6 is scheduled for desert warfare training exercises starting tomorrow. If that training happens to take you near those coordinates, and if you happen to find American personnel in need of extraction, well," he paused, letting the implication hang in the air, "we bring our people home." The meaning was crystal clear. They would have no official support, no backup, no recognition if things went wrong. But they would have each other, and they would have a chance to bring Marcus Reaper Lockhart home after 5 years of captivity or deep cover or whatever hell he'd been enduring. That night, as Sarah prepared for what could be her final mission, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a 7-year-old girl learning to shoot with her father's patient guidance to a 21-year-old woman preparing to lead Navy SEALs into hostile territory to save him. The supply clerk who had walked onto the range that morning was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused, forged in the fire of combat and tempered by the knowledge that her father might still be alive. She cleaned her rifle one more time, each movement a meditation, each action a prayer. Tomorrow she would either save her father or join him in whatever came after. Either way, Marcus Reaper Lockhart's daughter would complete her mission. The transport helicopter lifted off from Pendleton at 0300 hours, its rotors cutting through the darkness as it carried Sarah and the SEALs toward an uncertain fate. As the California coast disappeared beneath them, Sarah gripped her father's dog tags through her shirt and made him a promise in the privacy of her own mind. "I'm coming, Dad. Hold on just a little longer." The flight to the staging area in Turkey took 14 hours with multiple refueling stops and careful course changes to avoid detection. During the journey, Sarah briefed the team on her father's methods, his likely condition after 5 years of captivity, and the terrain they would be operating in. "My father was more than just a sniper," she explained, showing them satellite imagery of the target area on a ruggedized tablet. "He was a survivor. He understood that in war, the side that refuses to quit is the side that wins. If he's alive, he's been planning his escape for 5 years. We just need to give him the opportunity." Ethan studied the images with professional interest, his years of combat experience showing in the way he analyzed the terrain. This facility is heavily fortified, guard towers, overlapping fields of fire, minimal cover on approach. It's a killing ground for conventional forces. "Then it's good we're not conventional," Sarah replied. "We're going to use their confidence against them. They've held this position for years without serious threat. They're comfortable, complacent, and we're going to wake them up in a way they'll never forget." The plan Sarah developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attempting a full frontal assault or a complex infiltration that could be compromised at any point, they would create chaos and use it as cover. Dylan and Garrett would establish sniper positions on the overlooking ridges, providing precision fire support. Ethan would lead a diversionary attack on the facility's power generation, plunging the compound into darkness. Jake would coordinate the extraction, while Sarah went in alone to find her father. "That's suicide," Garrett protested. "You can't search a hostile facility by yourself." "I won't be alone," Sarah replied with quiet certainty. "If my father's alive, he'll know I'm coming. Ghost breathing isn't just about shooting. It's about connection, about feeling the rhythm of the battlefield. He taught me to shoot, but more importantly, he taught me to think like him. I'll know where he is. They inserted under cover of darkness, fast roping from helicopters into the Syrian mountains, 5 miles from the target. The terrain was brutal, rocky and steep with little vegetation for concealment. But Sarah moved through it like she'd been born there. Every step calculated, every movement efficient. The SEALs followed her lead, recognizing that in this moment, on this mission, she was the expert they needed to trust. As they established their positions around the facility, Sarah observed through her scope. The compound was a converted military base from the Soviet era, concrete buildings arranged around a central courtyard with defensive positions that had been refined over decades of conflict. She counted 32 guards, multiple machine gun positions, and what looked like a command center in the main building. But there was something else, something that made her heart race in her chest. In one of the guard towers, she saw a figure that moved differently from the others. Older, more deliberate, favoring his left leg slightly. The way he held his rifle, the way he scanned the horizon in overlapping sectors, it was familiar in a way that transcended conscious recognition. "I have eyes on a possible friendly," she whispered into her radio. "Guard Tower 3, can anyone confirm?" Jake focused his optics on the tower, his enhanced scope cutting through the darkness. "I see him. Male, approximately 50 to 55 years old, moving like he's had medical treatment, but not enough. Professional bearing." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she recognized more details through her scope. The way he rolled his right shoulder periodically, an old injury from a training accident when she was 9 years old. The way he touched his chest every few minutes, checking something hidden beneath his shirt. Dog tags, just like she did with his tags that she wore. "It's him," she breathed. And despite all her training, despite all her control, there was raw emotion in her voice. "It's my father." But Marcus Reaper Lockhart wasn't a prisoner in the conventional sense. He was armed, seemingly free to move, integrated into the facility's security. The implications were chilling and complex. Either he had been turned, his loyalty corrupted by 5 years of captivity and psychological pressure, or he was playing a longer game than anyone had imagined. "Could be Stockholm Syndrome," Ethan suggested quietly. 5 years is a long time. They could have broken him, convinced him to work with them. "Or he could be surviving the only way possible," Sarah countered, her voice firm with conviction. "My father understood deep cover operations. If they kept him alive, he would have found a way to make himself valuable while waiting for extraction. He's not broken. He's waiting." Sarah made a decision that went against all tactical doctrine, that violated every rule of operational security. She pulled out a small signal mirror from her kit, caught the last rays of sunset, and flashed a pattern toward the guard tower. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. SOS in Morse code, but also something more. It was the same pattern she'd used to signal her father during training exercises when she was a child, their private code for when she needed him to come to her position. The figure in the tower froze, his body going absolutely still in a way that was almost inhuman. Slowly, deliberately, he turned toward her position 800 meters away. For a moment that lasted an eternity, father and daughter looked at each other across hostile territory, across 5 years of absence, across all the pain and uncertainty and desperate hope. For 5 years, she had carried his dog tags like a memorial, believing him dead. 5 years of investigating alone, of training in silence, of becoming a warrior to honor a ghost. And now he stood before her, alive, breathing, real. The weight of those years crashed over her in a single moment. Every lonely night, every mission completed in his name, every time she had wondered if he would be proud. Then Marcus Reaper Lockhart raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into the air, the sharp cracks echoing across the compound. It was the signal for an attack that wasn't coming, designed to create confusion among the other guards who didn't understand why their trusted colleague was raising an alarm. "Now," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority. The SEALs struck simultaneously from multiple directions. Dylan and Garrett's sniper fire took out the perimeter lights and communication equipment with surgical precision. Ethan's demolition charges destroyed the power station in a roar of flame and debris, plunging the facility into darkness, broken only by emergency lighting that created more shadows than illumination. Sarah sprinted toward the compound, her path covered by Jake's precise fire that kept defenders pinned down and unable to engage her. She moved like her father had taught her, smooth and efficient, using darkness and chaos as allies rather than obstacles. Guards fired wildly at shadows and ghosts while she slipped past them like smoke. She reached the base of Tower 3 just as Marcus descended the ladder, his movements still showing the grace of a warrior despite whatever he'd endured. Up close, she could see what 5 years of captivity or deep cover had done to him. He was thinner, his face marked by scars that spoke of violence survived. Gray streaked through hair that had once been dark brown. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had taught her to see the world through a sniper's scope, were exactly as she remembered. "Junior," he said, his voice rough from years of speaking a language that wasn't his own, from shouting orders to maintain his cover. "Dad," she replied, and for the first time since this whole mission had started, her voice cracked with emotion. There was no time for reunion, no opportunity for the embrace they both desperately needed. The entire facility was responding to the attack, guards rushing to defensive positions, officers shouting orders in Arabic and Russian and broken English. They moved together instinctively, covering each other's movements with the practiced ease of a team that had trained together for years. Marcus's rifle spoke with deadly precision, each shot dropping an enemy before they could raise an alarm or bring effective fire to bear. Sarah matched him shot for shot, daughter and father creating a corridor of safety through the chaos. "Morrison?" Marcus asked as they reached the outer wall, his question economical, knowing she would understand what he was really asking. "Exposed," Sarah replied, equally brief. "His conspiracy is finished. We have all the evidence." "Not finished," Marcus corrected, his voice carrying knowledge gained through 5 years of living among the enemy. "He was just middle management. This goes higher. The architect, the man who really runs the network, he's still out there." They reached the extraction point where Jake and the team were holding a defensive perimeter. The SEALs' reaction to seeing Marcus Reaper Lockhart alive was professional and controlled. They would process the emotion later. Right now, they had to get everyone out alive before enemy reinforcements arrived. But Marcus wasn't moving toward the extraction vehicles. Instead, he turned back toward the facility, his eyes fixed on something the others couldn't see. "There are others," he said, and there was steel in his voice. 3 more Americans held in the underground section, Marines and pilots, listed as killed in action but kept alive for intelligence value. "We don't leave anyone behind." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Jake, get the vehicles ready. We're going back in." "Negative," Jake replied. "We go together, all of us." The second infiltration was harder, more dangerous. The facility's defenders had recovered from their initial shock and were mounting organized resistance. But now they faced not just Navy SEALs, but Marcus Reaper Lockhart fighting side by side with his daughter, their techniques complementing each other with almost supernatural precision. Marcus knew the facility layout, knew where the underground cells were hidden, knew which guards could be bypassed and which ones had to be eliminated. He led the team through maintenance tunnels and forgotten passages, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent 5 years memorizing every inch of his prison. They found the underground section, 3 cells containing American personnel who had been missing for years. A Marine captain who had disappeared in Iraq, an Air Force pilot shot down over Syria, a CIA operative who had been on a deep cover mission that went wrong. All of them kept alive because they had information their captors wanted. All of them surviving on the hope that someone would come. "Can they move?" Sarah asked her father as they broke open the cell doors. "They'll move or die trying," Marcus replied, already helping the Marine to his feet. "These men have survived this long because they refuse to quit. They're not going to quit now." The extraction was a running firefight through hostile territory. Enemy reinforcements had arrived, and the route to the vehicles was contested by men who knew the terrain and had numbers on their side. Dylan and Garrett dropped targets from their overwatch positions with mechanical efficiency, but there were too many, coming from too many directions. Sarah found herself in a position she had only trained for, never experienced. She was leading men in combat while under fire, making tactical decisions that would mean the difference between life and death. But her father's training took over, all those years of preparation crystallizing into instinct. She designated fields of fire, coordinated movement, made decisions with a clarity that surprised even her. When the Air Force pilot took a bullet to the leg, she didn't hesitate. Slinging her rifle, she grabbed him under the arms and dragged him to cover, while Marcus and Ethan provided suppressing fire that kept the enemy's heads down. "Just like training," Marcus said with something like pride in his voice. "Except the bullets are real," Sarah replied, applying a tourniquet to the pilot's leg with practiced efficiency. "Your training was always real," Marcus said, and there was weight in those words, acknowledgement of all the years he had prepared her for exactly this moment. "You just didn't know it." Sarah looked at her father, seeing the scars, the gray hair, the evidence of 5 years she could never get back. But she also saw something else, the pride in his eyes that said she had become exactly what he'd hoped for. Not just a warrior, but a leader. Not just his daughter, but her own person. "I know now," she said quietly, "and I'm grateful for all of it." They reached the vehicles after what felt like hours, but was actually just minutes of intense combat. Loading the wounded, they began the dangerous drive through hostile territory toward the extraction helicopters waiting in Turkish airspace. Behind them, the facility burned, its secrets destroyed by demolition charges Ethan had placed during the second infiltration. During the drive, Marcus finally had a moment to really look at his daughter, to see how she had grown in the 5 years they'd been apart. "You became everything I hoped you would," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the noise of the engine. "And more." "I became what you made me," Sarah replied, her eyes still scanning for threats even as they drove. "A survivor, a warrior, someone who doesn't quit." "I meant for you to have a choice," Marcus said, and there was regret in his voice. "A normal life, not this." "Normal was never an option after they took you," Sarah said simply. "But I made my choice. To find the truth. To find you." The helicopters appeared on schedule, U.S. Army Blackhawks that officially weren't there, that would never appear in any after-action report. As they lifted off from Syrian soil, Sarah looked back at the country that had stolen 5 years from her father and tried to steal him permanently. Jake handed Marcus a satellite phone. "Colonel Kincaid wants to debrief you immediately," but Marcus shook his head. "First, I need to talk to whoever sent my daughter that message. William Harding's been protecting me for 5 years, feeding the Syrians false intelligence while keeping me alive. Without him maintaining my cover, I would have been executed years ago." The revelation raised new questions. How had William maintained Marcus's cover for so long? What intelligence had Marcus gathered during his 5 years of deep cover? And most importantly, who was the architect that Morrison had answered to? The shadow figure who still remained free. The CIA operative who had been silent until now finally spoke. "Commander Lockhart, your father saved all our lives. The Syrians wanted to execute us after interrogation, but he convinced them we were more valuable alive. He gave them just enough real intelligence to keep them happy while protecting critical operations." "Playing the long game," Ethan said with genuine respect. "Surviving while gathering intelligence on their operations." Marcus pulled out a hidden flash drive that he had been carrying for 5 years, keeping it safe through countless close calls and dangerous moments. 5 years of intelligence on Syrian operations, their connections to Morrison's network, and the people above him. This goes all the way to Washington, to people who've been profiting from both sides of every conflict. Sarah took the drive, understanding its importance, understanding what her father had sacrificed to gather this information. He hadn't just been surviving, he had been working, gathering evidence that could expose corruption at the highest levels of government. At the base in Turkey, they were met by Colonel Kincaid and a full medical team. But also waiting was someone Sarah didn't expect. Rachel Sterling, the range safety officer who had first recognized her abilities, who had run her name through the database and started this entire chain of events. "I knew your father," Rachel said simply, looking at Marcus with eyes that held old memories. "Trained under him 15 years ago. When I saw Sarah shoot, I knew immediately who she was. The stance, the breathing, the patience, all Reaper signatures." As Marcus was taken for medical evaluation, he grabbed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "There's more, Junior. Morrison, Harper, they were just soldiers in someone else's war. The real enemy is still out there, the architect, and he knows we're coming for him now." "Then we'll find him," Sarah promised. Together, over the next 72 hours, the intelligence Marcus had gathered was analyzed and verified by experts who had spent careers studying these networks. It revealed a shadow organization within the government, officials who had been directing military operations for personal profit, selling American lives for political gain and financial benefit. The revelations led to arrests at the Pentagon, the State Department, and several defense contractors. Morrison was already in federal custody, but now the charges against him expanded to include treason and conspiracy to commit murder. But within 48 hours of Marcus's rescue, news came that sent shockwaves through the investigation. The architect had escaped federal custody during a supposedly routine transfer, disappearing into the same shadows from which he'd operated for decades. Intelligence intercepts placed him in Prague, meeting with the remnants of Morrison's network, trying to rebuild what Sarah and Marcus had torn down. The man who had orchestrated years of death for profit was attempting to resurrect his empire. Colonel Kincaid, now General Kincaid with a star on his collar, called Sarah and Marcus to a classified briefing room at Pendleton 1 week after the rescue. "The architect made a critical mistake," Kincaid said, displaying satellite imagery and intelligence reports. "He thinks we won't come for him. He thinks he's untouchable because he's operated in shadows for 30 years. Sarah studied the intelligence photos. The man was in his late 60s, unremarkable looking, the kind of person you would pass on the street without noticing. But his files revealed a 30-year career in intelligence, a master manipulator who had orchestrated conflicts for profit, who had American blood on his hands. "He knows we're coming," Marcus said quietly, his tactical mind already analyzing the situation. "Someone this careful, this connected, always knows. This will be a trap." "Then we spring it," Sarah replied, already calculating angles and distances from the satellite photos. "But on our terms." General Kincaid nodded. "This mission is personal for all of us. The target is the man who ordered Reaper's capture, who facilitated Morrison's conspiracy, who has 89 American deaths to answer for. This is not a capture operation. This is an elimination." The mission would be surgical, precise, and final. The architect had orchestrated too many deaths, profited from too much American blood. There would be no trial, no public exposure, just two ghosts in the night delivering justice that the system couldn't. Sarah and Marcus spent 3 days planning the operation with the precision that had defined both their careers. Jake and his SEAL team would provide security and extraction, but the shot itself, the mission-critical elimination, would belong to the Lockharts. Father and daughter operating together for the first time in 6 years. The night before deployment, Sarah and Marcus stood once more on the Pendleton Range. They didn't shoot. They simply stood together, feeling the weight of what was coming, understanding that the hunt for the architect would end one way or another. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said quietly. "You've already proven everything you needed to prove." "This isn't about proving anything anymore," Sarah replied. "This is about justice. For you, for those Marines in Syria, for everyone the architect has killed for profit. This is about finishing what we started." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "Then we end it together." 3 days later, in a safe house overlooking the Vltava River in Prague, the architect held a meeting with what remained of his network. He believed himself safe, protected by layers of security and the arrogance of someone who had evaded consequences for 3 decades. He didn't know that 800 meters away, on a rooftop that overlooked his position, two of America's finest snipers had been in position for 6 hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Marcus lay in the spotter position, his calculations precise, his experience guiding every adjustment. Sarah was behind the rifle, not the M24 from Pendleton, but a custom system built specifically for this shot. "Wind is .3 from the east," Marcus whispered. "Temperature 22 degrees, humidity 65%, range confirmed at 1847 meters. 1,847 meters, the exact distance of Sarah's unofficial record, the shot she'd made on her 14th birthday, the distance that had started everything." "I see him," Sarah replied, her breathing already transitioning into the ghost breathing technique her father had taught her. Through the scope, she watched the architect, seeing the man who had destroyed so many lives, who had treated American soldiers as commodities to be traded for profit. "Your shot," Marcus said quietly. "Take it when you're ready." Sarah settled deeper into her position. Her breathing slowed, then nearly stopped. The partial respiratory pause that kept her core absolutely stable while maintaining minimal air exchange. Years of training, years of preparation, all condensing into this single moment. She thought about the 7 Marines who died in Syria, about the 89 Americans killed by equipment the architect had sold to their enemies, about 5 years stolen from her father, about all the families destroyed by one man's greed. Her finger found the trigger. 3 heartbeats of absolute stillness. Then the rifle fired. 1,847 meters away, the architect never heard the shot. He simply ceased to exist. His 30-year reign of corruption ended by a 21-year-old woman who had earned her legend, one shot at a time. "Target eliminated," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying no triumph, no satisfaction. Only the acknowledgement of a mission completed. "Confirmed," Marcus replied, watching through his spotter scope. "Let's go home." 6 months later, Sarah stood on the Pendleton Range with her father, teaching a new generation of snipers the techniques Marcus had taught her. Ghost breathing, tactical patience, the understanding that true warriors prove themselves through action, not words. The SEALs were there too, having earned the right to learn from both Lockharts. Jake, Ethan, Dylan, and Garrett had become more than colleagues. They were family, bound by combat and shared purpose. "Do you think it's really over?" one of the younger trainees asked, a female Marine who reminded Sarah of herself at that age. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a glance. They both knew the answer. There would always be another conspiracy, another enemy, another fight. But they had done what they set out to do. Morrison's network was destroyed. The architect was dead. The men who had killed Marines for profit had paid the price. "It's over when we say it's over," Sarah replied, "and right now, we've earned our rest." That evening, as the sun set over Camp Pendleton, father and daughter sat together one final time on the range where everything had changed. Sarah was no longer the supply clerk who had walked onto this range that morning 6 months ago. She was Phantom, a legend in her own right, a warrior who had proved that skill, courage, and determination mattered more than age, size, or assumptions. "Your mother would have been proud," Marcus said quietly, breaking a silence they'd maintained about her death for years. She always said you had my eyes but her heart, strong enough to do what needed doing, wise enough to know when to stop. Is it time to stop? Sarah asked. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing not just the warrior she'd become, but the woman she was growing into. It's time to choose, he said. I chose the warrior's path because I thought it was the only way to serve. But you've already proved yourself. You've saved lives, exposed evil, brought men home. You've earned the right to choose what comes next. Sarah thought about that choice. Delta Force still wanted her. The intelligence community wanted her. She could spend the next 20 years hunting ghosts in the shadows like her father had. Or she could choose something different. I choose to train them, she said finally, nodding toward the range where tomorrow's warriors would learn from today's heroes. I choose to make sure the next generation is ready. I choose to pass on what you gave me. Marcus smiled, and in that smile was everything he'd never been able to say. Pride, love, relief that his daughter might escape the loneliness that had defined his life. Then that's what we'll do, he said, together. Marcus pulled out a small box. Inside was a challenge coin unlike any other. One side bore the Reaper insignia, the grim figure that had been his call sign for decades. The other side showed a smaller ghost emerging from the shadow of a larger one. I had this made 5 years ago, Marcus said quietly, hoping that someday I could give it to you. Sarah took the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. Ghost's daughter? No, her father corrected, and there was pride in his voice. Your own ghost. You've earned your own legend. The story of the supply clerk who humbled Navy SEALs became more than legend. It became a lesson taught at every sniper school, every leadership course, every training program that dealt with the dangers of assumption and the power of earned respect. But for Sarah Lockhart, it was simply the beginning of a new chapter. She had been Reaper's daughter. She had been Phantom, the ghost who hunted in shadows. Now she would become something more important. The teacher who ensured that Marcus Reaper Lockhart's legacy lived on in every warrior she trained. And in the quiet moments, when the range was empty and the sun painted the targets gold, Sarah would stand where she'd stood that first morning and remember. Remember the SEALs who had learned to see past their assumptions. Remember William Harding, who had protected her father for 5 years. Remember the warehouse battle, the Syria rescue, all the moments that had forged her into who she was. But most of all, she would remember that she was her father's daughter, and that was all that mattered. The ghosts could rest now. Their war was won, and the next generation was ready to carry the fight forward.